Hello everybody and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program, where I've been doing a little bit of off-camera testing. The atomic rocket motors mounted where they were causing issues for us. Those issues specifically being they were overwhelming our gimbaling. Or rather, the lack of gimbaling was overwhelming our SAS. And it was pushing us into wacky attitudes again. So I've replaced them with additional fuel tanks here. Now we still need a way to burn the non-oxidized liquid fuel, right? Once we get up into vacuum. So how do we want to do that? We need to figure out a way for these NERV rocket motors to be inline without extending this too far this way. That's going to be complicated, I think. Unless we radially mount them and don't undersling them like this. Now, I was also thinking perhaps we should get rid of the hammer solid fuel booster. I don't know, it seems to be doing an okay job accelerating us up, but I feel like the whiplash will already do that. So we could ditch this and replace this with, say, a T800 plus a T200, I feel like. So we take this off, we put on a T800 onto that decoupler like that. Put that on there. Now we do have a fuel flow issue, and I'll go into that in a moment. We can actually upgrade this from a T200 up to a T400, I think. Actually, we could probably get this to like a T600 if such a thing existed. We could do like that. But I think I'm going to do a T100 here. So we're going to put that guy on like that, just so that we have this nice line going back. That's purely for aesthetic reasons right there. So we're going to need to strut this in, of course, and we will go ahead and do that like... I can select the strut like... where is it? Why is it there? I don't recall telling it to go there, but okay. We'll put it in like that. And then we will, of course, need to run our fuel line in here. Now, we do have a fuel timing issue that I identified that we will definitely deal with here. And let me explain exactly what's going on here. So we run the fuel from outside in, right? And that means that this fuel tank burns out, then this fuel tank burns out, then this fuel tank burns out. But this one we eject first with the atomic rocket motor, like when it was here. Now it's not there anymore, so that's no longer a concern. Now, where can we radially put this? It'll need to be inline vertically. And that's what's really complicated here. Now, we could attach them, you know, hypothetically somewhere out here. It would be inverted from where the vectors are, but this will break off on liftoff. There's no doubt about that. So that's not viable. Underslinging them isn't viable either because we can't hold attitude. So where do we put them? That is quite a question, isn't it? I'm going to bump the thrust limiting on this up to like 40% thrust. Reason being that we are dropping the SRBs. And I guess we'll just try a flight of this. Now, I'm expecting that we're going to have a fair amount of wasted liquid fuel here. Again, I'd like to figure out a way to put an atomic engine on this, a nuclear engine. And that would do wonders for our initial space maneuverings. Are you connected? Yes, you are. Okay. So let's just go ahead and throttle up, SAS on. We're going to retract these, apparently. Apparently they didn't start properly retracted. That's fine. And we're going to take off here. Fantastic. So let's see what this does. I'm seeing some wiggling here that I don't really like. Okay. Not the worst takeoff there. We'll hold at that sweet, sweet 45 degrees point if we can get the craft to settle there, but we should be able to settle there about now-ish. Fantastic. So you can see here we're drawing from these outer tanks currently, and we'll ditch those just as soon as the tanks run out. Oxidizer is gone now. Off they go. There's some explosions that happen, but I've never seen it actually break important parts of the plane, so I don't think we actually care all that much. Trying to change our actual attitude here a little bit. There we go. How are we doing in here? So we're not pulling from this yet. We're pulling from this interior one, and that is to be expected, because this is what we ditch next because of the whiplashes on here, right? So these will be the next ones to go. And as soon as that oxidizer is burned out, we should see the whiplashes no longer functioning, in theory. Or at the very least, they're ramping down now because of oxygen flow. We're burned out of this stage here, so as soon as we're no longer getting thrust from our whiplashes, that's when we eject this. There we go. That all blows up, but we're fine. We're now pulling from these, in theory, except that we are not, because there's no fuel connection here. So we're going to burn out of fuel here fairly soon, and it's because we're going to run out of oxidizer, and this was about what we expected. You can see here our apoapsis is actually plenty high here, and we're just going to try to head on over to the horizon. I don't think we have quite enough to make it into orbit here. Yeah. With this fuel flow issue, we definitely don't. So we're going to revert that back to the spaceplane hangar. And we are going to, instead of flowing this fuel in here, we are instead... Well, let's think here. This fuel currently flows in like this. Does it need to? If we do this, it should burn out this first, or rather this first, and then we can flip around when these ejections happen. So this would happen here, or rather, it would happen... Come on. It would happen here. And then this would happen up here when that ejects. There we go. So we're still going to have some leftover fuel. But with this change around, we should no longer have leftover oxidizer. And oxidizer is the heavier component there. Keep in mind. Okay, so at this point, we should burn out the outer stage, and then that ejects, or the outer tanks, rather, the underslung tanks. Then we should burn out the central underslung tanks, and those will eject. Then we burn out the whiplash tank, and that will eject at the same time as the decouplers, which isn't at the same time as these, which isn't necessarily what we want, is it? We want it to be like that, because we're going to have some oxidizer in this. Now, are these timings going to be correct? I don't know that these timings are going to be correct, and we will still have some wasted liquid fuel. And we still have that small power issue. I did add in 2 extra 1K batteries to help with that power issue, though. It's not going to fix the problem, but it means that we'll get longer burns. So hopefully that'll help. Okay, we'll retract our solar panels. Throttle up, SAS on, pitch up, and off we go. Try to go as straight as we can here. We'll lift off in a moment. There we go, landing gear up. Holding this 45-degree attitude is a little bit spicy at this point. It does settle in eventually. Okay, something along the lines of that. And then we detach these tanks here, these outer tanks, as soon as we run out of oxidizer. I know we're at 94 degrees. Okay, those go. Trying to change our attitude just a little bit here. 87 now. Holding this exact attitude that I want is slightly challenging. Okay, so we are draining out these tanks here. That's perfect. And the inner ones are not draining at all. So we're only draining the underslung extra tanks at this point. That's perfect. Once we run out of oxidizer in this tank, we are free to eject this underslung tank. We are getting close to our whiplashes being useless. So you can see here that there's some timing issues. We're carrying some unnecessary weight, but I don't think that's ultimately a huge issue. We ditch those. Our whiplashes are flamed out due to lack of oxygen. That's fine. And now we're picking up a bit of a shimmy. And I think, ooh, that was quite a pitch down. Why did we suddenly start pitching down like that? I don't know. I'm not sure why we're pitching down so much. Our apoapsis is actually high enough at this point. So let's just ride it. And let's head on over to the horizon. And we're just going to coast into space at this point. Now this is claiming that we have 8,000 DV here. And that's because of the whiplashes. They are still attached, of course. We are not pulling from any of the fuselage at this point. So this is a pretty good ascent that we have here. I'm quite pleased with that. We're waiting until we hit vacuum for peak efficiency from our engines here. And we're going to hit vacuum now. We're still heavily wanting to pitch down here. That's interesting. We can fight it, but the SAS does not even attempt to fight it. Okay, this oxidizer is gone, so we ditch that. And now we're much better. That's interesting, isn't it? It's like the thrust was still coming from the whiplashes there. Even though it wasn't. It objectively wasn't. That's definitely very interesting. Now we've got this shimmy that we picked up here, and I'll try to correct that a bit. You can see our apoapsis is really high here. I mean, I wasn't attempting to do anything with that. But, I mean, this is functional. This is quite functional. Let's go ahead and position for this maneuver. And we'll warp to that next maneuver as soon as we can. We should also remember to open our Gigantors. Okay, and then we'll warp to this. And I mean, in reality, we wouldn't be aiming for this high of an apoapsis, right? Like, this is a lot more delta V than we should need. But we're going to have more fuel than we need as well. I'm just going to rotate here for purposes of our top-mounted solar panels. Not sure that that's helpful. And we're going to begin this burn. Fantastic. And these guys are not currently burning. There we go. Okay. So, I mean, our thrust to weight here is incredibly low, but that got us into an elliptical orbit. A pretty high elliptical orbit at that. Fascinating. Now, this is a situation that we probably should have thought of. And I'm going to address it now. So, Actually, before I do that, I want to check how much fuel do we have left over. 503. Yeah, I'd really like to be able to burn that off in nuclear engines. That would be really good for these early maneuvers. But what I'm going to do regarding these Gigantors is I'm actually going to swap locations with these photovoltaic panels. I'm just going to put a single photovoltaic panel up here atop the batteries. Not at that angle. That's a jaunty angle if ever I've seen one. We're going to instead place it around here, and we're just going to make that a little bit more streamlined. Not that streamlined. That's a little too streamlined. We're going to do something kind of like that. I don't want it to clip. There we go. And then we're going to have these guys, instead of being spinally mounted, or rather, instead of being radially mounted here, we're going to spinally mount them similarly to the tail fins. Now, this does mean that we'll have to orient in such a way that these Gigantors aren't blocked by our wings. But I think that this is a much, much better location for the Gigantors. That does open up a little bit of space here. How important do we think this winglet is up front? Because if we were able to ditch this, if we had good enough attitude control to ditch that, then that would mean that we could theoretically run our... We don't even need to ditch that. I have an idea. I'm going to place these photovoltaic panels here instead. They're going to be in mirror symmetry. Ideally. There we go. Mirror symmetry, and we'll place them right here. Now, they're unlikely to really get a whole lot of airflow, or rather of light flow there, right? Not really airflow. But they're likely to be blocked by a number of things. That's not the point. The point is this. We can put parallel nuclear engines here that would then detach. There should be enough room to undersling one here and oversling one here. So, what if we were to put in, say, radial decouplers in mirror symmetry? Actually, no, it would need to be radial, wouldn't it? In radial symmetry, and it would go, say, here? Not exactly there. It would go, say, here? We could even toss in a little bit of fuel here, in theory. So then we'd toss in, say, a T400. It's kind of ridiculous looking. There's no doubt about that. We'd toss in a T400 here. That's way too much. We don't have the space here. Unless we were to upscale this landing gear. Or, at the very least, move it down. Or, what if we straight up put the landing gear without symmetry on under here? We'd have to correct this angle, of course. This is kind of wacky. We're not planning for this thing to re-enter, though, right? So, we're not planning to land this thing ever again. Why are we even carrying the landing gear as far as we are? Why don't we just detach the landing gear along with these? This is unnecessary weight. So we can do something like that. That actually buys us a lot more space to potentially even mount the engines back here. The nuclear engines back here. So we could actually, hypothetically, ditch this. This is unnecessary now. We would need a large landing gear here. Or perhaps even an extra large landing gear. I would like this to be detached. But I think this is approximately the correct size. It would need to be a little lower, I feel like. So we want this to be decouplable, right? So we would put in a decoupler right here. And then we would put in the extra large landing gear here. It looks ridiculous. There's no doubt about that. And then this decoupler is here. I definitely want to make sure that this is attached to the decoupler. Let's see here. I want to grab the decoupler. Yes, it's attached to the decoupler. This will be pretty substantially aimed upward. There's no doubt about that. And then this would get ditched at the same time that the other landing gear does. Then we would pull these engines off like that. We would need to put nuclear engines on. The nuclear engines would go somewhere hypothetically... We need to be in engines. Would go somewhere hypothetically here. And they'd need to be in mirror symmetry mode. There we go. Then we need TD25s here. No, not 25s. We need TD12s. Like that. We would need fuel flow all the way out there. So the fuel would flow in, say, from here to here. I don't think that's quite where it needs to be. Not quite there. Nope. Just need to get this correct here. It's not quite wanting to flow this fuel in where I want it to. There we go. That would work. And I think that might be enough space to take off without blowing up these vectors. Maybe. Okay, so this would need to detach at the same time that the inners detach, in theory. Maybe even a little after that, because we have the oxidizer in the chassis. Okay, so it would be something like that, and then the nuclear engines would need to fire at that time. Okay, let's just see if we blow up the vectors on liftoff. This is going to be very interesting. I have no idea what this is going to look like on the landing strip here. This is going to be wacky. Okay, so there's a lot of bouncy in there. We, of course, retract these solar panels. We've got a big old physics twist going on here. SAS on, throttle up, and we'll see just how wacky this is. Okay. Do we lose the vectors on liftoff? No, we do not. That is amazing. I can't believe it. That actually worked. Through some miracle. I'm just trying to get our attitude exactly where I want it. It's very difficult to get it exactly. This is good enough. As soon as this oxidizer is gone, we ditch the outer tank. And the landing gear. Okay. Now we're draining from these tanks. As soon as that oxidizer is gone... How's our apoapsis looking? It's looking reasonable. As soon as this liquid fuel and oxidizer is gone, then we will, of course, ditch these underslung tanks. This is so ridiculous back here. And we should really probably put in a couple of struts to stabilize this structure. I think that that is going to be necessary. We're going to be losing our turbo ramjet engine soon. Oxidizer is being almost used up in this underslung tank stack. There we go. And now we're just using up this oxidizer here. So there goes our turbo ramjets, and now we're being powered just by our vectors. We can see that our apoapsis is already reasonably high here. I'm going to go over into prograde, and we're just going to try to hold here as best we can. With these underslungs, we're still having a few issues with that. I'm not doing anything with course correction here. This is all SAS at this point driving this. We're waiting for the oxidizer on this underslung tank to go away. Once we ditch that, we should be much more stable. There we go. Our apoapsis is plenty high. Let's go ahead and add a maneuver here. And we're going to just try to circularize a bit. Something like that. We'll lock to that maneuver node. As soon as we're in space, we'll know what our burn time is. And at this point, we're just operating off of this liquid fuel and oxidizer. Right here. Okay, 48 seconds. So T minus 24 seconds is when we want to warp to. I should open up our Gigantors. Not that they're really necessary right now, but we'll get them opened up. Warp to T minus 24 seconds. Okay, we'll burn this now. Excellent. We'll just try to hold this position for the time being. We're getting a lot of gimbal shimmy here from these vectors. But they're going to be burned out in a moment. There they go. And now we use our nuclear fuel engines. They don't gimbal, so at this point all we've got is our ASAS. This feels repeatable. This feels very repeatable. Now we don't have the biggest amount of DV in this nuclear engine stage, right? That's okay. We don't need it. I mean, this is enough DV for the nuclear engines to escape from Kerbal. And then on top of that, we've got almost 13,000 delta V in our ion propulsion. Now that ion propulsion is really low thrust to weight. But that's okay. I can't believe that this is actually working. Like, this is functional. Like, this will do the trick. Well, I think our design and simulation phase on this is over. Also over is this episode. So next episode, we are going to be sending 2 of these out to the Jool station. You can leave your offerings to the engagement gods in the form of likes, comments, subscribes, and bell ringings, and I will see you all next time.